first of all, how many of you have been with me before? Okay, how many of you have not? So welcome who haven't. Okay, Michael Balinsky, I'm the exec for the Chicago Board of Rabbis. This is my, what, fifth, sixth time doing this? Yeah. So welcome. Just the ground rules are as follows. One is anything that's not clear, you need clarification, just ask. Don't be embarrassed. Just ask. It's a safe place. You agree, disagree, comments with others and me, just feel free to speak up. That's the intent here, and I think people have been here in the past that felt that they could speak up. Yeah? Yes. All right, good. And we're going to do this more, dialogical than lecture. So those are the ground rules. So it's very, I really appreciate hearing everyone's voice. Secondly, there's a Tuesday morning class in Wheaton, Illinois, at the Presbyterian Church, which I've done a couple of times this year. There's a wonderful pastor there, and so he's invited a few rabbis out to do some teaching. So I commented after I'd been there a couple of times that there's also this Tuesday morning group in here at BJBE, and I'm not sure there's a difference between you and them, except they're Presbyterians, we're Jews, but a very similar type makeup, and also a very much a pleasurable group of people who are really open and open to expression. Yes, it's just water, so that's the worst it will be. Yeah. That's actually Scotch, but anyway, it just struck me that I said sometime we should get the groups together because it's a similar educational background, and really a great group. Okay, so what has been the theme you've been doing this year, or what have other people done that you've had?
Different themes, very different. Nothing connected with.
We just got done with the counting, introducing the counting of the Omer.
Oh, okay. So I'm not sure. I forget what the theme was. Rabbi Stoller, Brian asked me to do some stuff on life cycles. So yeah. Okay. So that's what we'll do. But what we're going to look at some different areas. But what we're not going to do is do it from step through step. We're not going to take, okay, here's what you do for a wedding and do everything. We're just going to I just want to look at some themes and some issues related to various aspects of the life cycle, which I hope are interesting. And without going through, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Okay, if that's okay. I figured you probably had some of that before. And so this way we'll look at just some ideas related to certain things. If you have questions about it, of course, feel free to ask. But that's what I thought we would do, and that's what I prepared. So let me head out
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Okay, when I attended weddings under the chuppah, I don't know if there is a law about that. The parents of the bride and the groom are standing under the chuppah behind the bride and the groom. My daughter just got wed by a rabbi in Cancun, and he put a table there under the chuppah with the wine and everything, and the talit, and then we stood outside of the chuppah. All the parents were outside of the chuppah standing. So I was asking if there is any rule about that, because that was strange to me.
Oh, they may need a second wedding. Not to worry. No. It actually really depends on. It's a great question. I'm going to expand. I'll get to the particulars of it in a minute. And it's a great question because much of what is involved in moments like that, and some of these moments, there are really two aspects. There are some clear, or not so clear actually, or different ways of doing things that are really long part of the tradition in terms of the formality of what's done. So we'll look at a little bit later on a couple of the Sheva Brachot, but the 7 blessings recited under the chuppah, those are those are already from the Talmud. I mean, they're there. So that's a long-standing tradition. Getting married under a canopy is actually newer. Because the term, and this is just one of those dynamics of life cycle, life cycle things. The term chuppah, I hope I spelled it right because we're on camera. The term chuppah, when we hear it, you say, how was the chuppah? I mean, it's referring both to the wedding, but what comes to mind is this canopy, right? Some people decorate with flowers, some people design their own, or it's passed on. Some people use a talit for the chuppah. But the term chuppah is actually a technical term. That doesn't necessarily mean wedding canopy. It really is a term which is used in defining as what's the final part of the marriage that really shows they're married. And so what it has become, for very good reason, is this notion of a wedding canopy, which is really creating this new space. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on in details. Others thought chuppah was when the couple were alone together after the ceremony. That's the definition of chuppah. So it's come to take on this canopy element, but there is discussion of medieval sources, as to what exactly the nature of that term means. So, but the second aspect, we've had a lot with life cycle things that we see associated with them. Most of them are customs. Okay, there's organic development of customs, some of which vary between locales, where Jews are from, certainly between Ashkenazic Jews and Sephardic Jews, but even between Jews from North Africa. There were some from, some from Tunisia, some from Morocco. So there's all sorts of customs. If you have an interest in this, there's a book called, I think, The Jewish Life Cycle by Daniel Sperber, Sperber, S-P-E-R-B-E-R. And he has records of all, with beautiful pictures also, records of all these different customs that take place, that develop. Now the issue which you're describing of the chuppah may very well depend on how big the chuppah was. Simply a logistic issue.
It was a table.
Yeah, I mean, a logistic issue. Plus, when I've done weddings, I've always asked for a table, because you have wine and the ketubah, you don't want to just hold it. So I always tell them, you give me a little table, put it on the side. They always put it in the middle of the chuppah. And I always pick it up and move it to the side. So it just becomes a logistical issue. The people who have to be, are doing the chuppah are the bride and groom. That's really it. And then the rabbi underneath also, that's really it. So the fact that you were sort of standing outside that area is not a problem at all. It may have just have been more a logistical thing, or it may be the custom, the way, they do it. But within all these areas, in many cases, many of the practices what we associate with life cycle ceremonies are customs that develop organically. And where there are certain things that are certainly much older that are defining, but it also, that's I think part of the, almost one person calls the enchantment aspect of it, are these different customs that develop, become part of the tradition, some of which, as Jews have moved and smaller areas have broken down, we've sort of, merged into larger areas, some of these traditions are lost, which is okay, but that's the way things happen. But for some of them there is, if you have a nostalgic sense, that would have been nice. But certainly that's the movement from small areas, Jews living together, to living in much larger cities, and that breakdown of customs between different towns. So, okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. It's an important question because that's brought to mind looking at things. All right, so we'll hand out some texts. As usual with me, we do lots of text. And I just want to look at, we'll start with the first text. So I'd appreciate if you don't look ahead, okay? So here, why don't you pass them down. If we're short, we should have enough, so I'll just get you some more. Yeah, you don't need to share. I haven't, there should be more than enough. Good morning. That too. You don't need to share. I have extras. So I'll just start from this end.
We need another one here too.
Okay. Are we done here? And who else needs?
They're coming down.
Oh, they're coming. There's some there. And there should be enough with those, I think. Because your office did it, so. You have more than one there, right?
Yes.
Oh, great. Great, great. All right, so what I want to do, the first question I want to ask is, should we even call this life cycle? Is there such a thing as a Jewish life cycle? So, when I talk about life cycle, what comes to mind for you? And everything in the middle. Okay. So I want to leave that. We often determine the way birth, death, everything in the middle. And no, but the implication of cycle is it keeps on going that way. But let's look at. I just chose this text. I could have chosen another one as an example. I want to look at text number 1. This is one of the forms. There are different kinds of a Misha Beirach. You may be familiar with this. There's a Misha Berach, a blessing, usually done when, or often done in association when the Torah is read. Doesn't necessarily have to be done then. A blessing, right? That those who bless. It's often associated. People are certainly familiar with it, making a Misha Berach for someone who is ill, right? That they get healed. But there's also a Misha Berach for, in this case, I just took the one. For a family who had just had a baby boy, but before the Brit Milah, before the circumcision. Because you have 8 days, if the baby's healthy, to do it on the 8th day. So this would just be a text of a Misha Berach that would be recited in the congregation if the mother would probably certainly be home. But the father would have an aliyah to be called to the Torah, and it's before the Brit itself. So then you would make a Misha Beirach afterwards. Okay, so that's the context. That's the context where this is from. So let me just read it. May he or God who blessed our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses and Aaron, David and Solomon, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless the woman. All right, and this would be the woman who had the baby. Name and daughter of so-and-so who has given birth, and her son, who is nameless because we haven't had the Brit Milah, the circumcision, yet when the baby's named, and her son who has been born to her at an auspicious time. It's always an auspicious time. Anyway, her husband, the child's father, is making a contribution to charity. That's traditionally to be done with a Misha Beirach. Okay, we also do it, that's traditional thing. We also do it traditionally when someone has passed away. At a funeral or in memory of a yortzeit, at the anniversary of the death, they'll make an El Malek, which is the conclusion. We're not going to, I don't know the text of it today, but the traditional version of this El Malek, this prayer in memory of the person who has passed away, traditionally would include a place in there that that a contribution to charity will be made, in memory of the soul of the person who died, right? So whether it's a sad occasion or a happy occasion, it's always an auspicious time to do something for others. And in this case, to give tzedakah. But okay, that's just part of it. It doesn't have to be there. It's just part of the tradition. Yeah.
Is that why there were beggars at the cemetery at Waltham?
Well, it's a chance to get a little money. Yeah. Oh yeah. All right. I mean, although certainly an El Malek would not be recited at weddings, beggars also used to come to the weddings because how could you deny someone, on this day of great rejoicing for a wedding, how could you deny someone, some money? So beggars would come to weddings as well. Again, we've lost that, right? Usually, if you do it in a hotel or a country club, it's hard to get in there. But we've lost that element, which goes to, again, something with the nature of which we're going to worthwhile to mention. Some of the nature of these events, they're essentially public events, not private events. And if they're public events, they're going to be beggars. And so there is an apocryphal story, probably. But I've heard it, but I have no idea where it happened, and it's probably apocryphal, but it's a good story, that there was one town in Europe where the beggars felt they were being mistreated at weddings. They weren't being treated properly. So they went on strike and said, we're not going to show up to the weddings. And you can't have a wedding without beggars. So they have to be treated better. Now that may be an apocryphal story, but there is something about that communal element. Okay, her husband's the child's father is making contribution to charity. Bischar says, as a reward for this, may the father and mother merit to bring the child into the covenant of Abraham. Okay, it's talking about a son here specifically. Okay, Brit Avram Avinu, the covenant of Abraham, and to a life of Torah, to the marriage canopy, and to do good deeds. And let us say Amen. All right, good. All right, the Hebrew for this is also recited traditionally at a circumcision. You will also see this often recited at a baby naming ceremony for girls, although we won't be focusing on. We'll be focusing on it a little bit later today, but just so you know, and it often may be recited out loud by everyone there. Kashem shenichnas lebris. Well, this is bringing the child into it because it hasn't happened. At a circumcision, you would say Kashem shenichnas lebris. Ken yekane satorah l'chopah l'masim tovim. Just as this child has been brought into the covenant, because it happens right after. Okay, this is just before the event is taking place. So too, they should lead a life of Torah, chuppah, meaning a wedding, and a life of good deeds. Okay, so that becomes sort of the formula. So my question is as follows. What are we doing? What do you think we're doing? What are the implications of, or what do you hear when we have this formula recited? Okay, as a reward for this, may the father and mother merit to bring the child into the covenant of Abraham, to a life of Torah, to the marriage canopy, and to do good deeds. What's happening here? What do you think this line is functioning as? What's going on? You understand the question? Mm-hmm. All right, so think about it. Give you 20 seconds to think about it. Okay, I see 1, 2, 3.
First thing I thought of was the obvious that you're asking God's blessing on God to bless a particular situation, a particular child. But I think now I'm looking it over again, it's a renewal, a reminder of the covenant. And that would be, as a Jew, maybe the most central point of the whole experience.
Good, thank you. Yeah.
It's like an expectation that the Judaism is expecting this boy to grow up, or the girl, and to do the good deeds, and to follow Torah, and to become a person of the Jewish community.
Good, thank you. Yeah, good.
Teach them to your children. This is your obligation. It's not even a request. It's not nice. This is your obligation. Reminding you gently at this happy time. Now you've got a job set up for you.
Good, all right, thank you. Anyone else? You
I
want
was
to
going to say it's a reminder for obligation, a commitment to covenant and to the Jewish values.
Good. Anyone else want to add anything else? Yeah.
I think it's like something that's ingrained. I'll never forget, a friend of mine once said to me, how did your parents talk to you about going to college? And should you go to college? And I said, my parents never talked to me about if I should go to college. my parents would just say, where do you want to go to? I mean, it was that expectation, and I think this does that same thing.
Yeah, good, good. Anyone else want to add?
Is it
Yeah.
also welcoming the baby into the community as well, because it's a public ceremony.
Absolutely, absolutely as well. Good. Yeah, I'll take one more.
Well, I'm not sure about where it says here to give charity, but if charity is part of it, we Jews have to go ahead and always remember to be grateful, and that even in good, you have to think about those who don't have, so it's never all the way. You have to also put a little bit of a lemon into your sweet and sour.
Yeah, okay, right. That's a good question about the consciousness of it. Is the consciousness of it here to think, well, there are people who don't have, so it's tempering the rejoicing? Or is it at this time of rejoicing, you're also thinking about others so that they should? Not so much tempering it, but reminding you it's not just about what's going on with you, by definition. So either way is certainly fine. So I want to thank you for those comments, because I think they're all on target. I just want to add it, I just want to take it also from an additional lens. But I think that ties in, it all ties into what was said. I think an additional lens of looking at it is a way, if you alluded to it, is a way of telling the parents, this is both your child and not your child. And it's not about your individual dreams for the child, although it's certainly, I mean, it's not excluded, right? I want to be clear. It's not either or, it's not black and white here. But that it's also a reminder precisely at this time. It's a reminder of community, obligation, etc. That's really saying to the parents, this now is your job, right? Your job is to ensure that the child is a life of Torah, get married, and the good deeds is added a little bit later, but a life of good deeds as well. That's your job as a parent. Now, I know not all kids get married. I understand not everyone gets married. This isn't. This is a general, direction to go. But I think part of it is a way of saying to the parents as well, this is your job now. It's whatever other dreams and aspirations you have for your child, that's great, but it must also include a life of Torah, etc., that comes with it. And that's, I think, what you said about, in terms of your own upbringing with college. Obviously, not everyone, has that. And if it's between liberal arts and plumbing, I may recommend plumbing. But it's a living. But still, that it's part of that in creating that sense. But that's if you say, well, I don't care about Torah. That's not my. No, we're telling the parents at this time, this is what it means to have this kid. All right, yeah.
Does it also place an obligation on the community
Good.
to have a part in the raising of that child and children in general?
Well, there is certainly a community expectation, and there is a community expectation to ensure that these things take place. Now, I don't want to play that in legal terms. I want to play that more in the sense of the village terms, right? It takes a village. But I think that's certainly an absolute element associated with it. It's not, and precisely these things are done publicly, so this is being publicly stated so that the division between the family and the community, it's a very not so clear division at times. So I think that would certainly play an element in here. Now I want to add one thing to this. I think this is the real Jewish statement of the life cycle. It isn't, now you'll notice, it isn't a cycle. It's just there's no sense, just so you bring the child to covenant, they should lead a life of Torah, the marriage canopy, good deeds, and have a good funeral. Right? That's not included. Now we all know death is death, and it's there, and it faces faces all of us. But that, and it has its own, certainly, laws and traditions attached with it, and we'll look at some of that next week. But it's not really the Jewish life cycle, right? The Jewish life cycle is not really a cycle. It's rather birth and then these places that one is to go, okay? Death is there, but it's not really part of the life cycle. It's just inevitable, but it's like the life of Torah, marriage clearly is and a life of good deeds. Okay, now I just want to see the expressions flip to the back, since Pesach's coming up. Now here you have the 4 sons, okay? Now what do you notice? You have, on the right is the wise son, going from right to left. You have wise son, wicked son, simple son, and the one who doesn't know how to ask. All right, so what do you notice about this?
The size of it.
Yeah, so what's the implication of that?
With age.
What?
With age.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, it could be like age. One way to look at this, it's age, right? It's not only age, because if you look at the Russia, but it's age. All right, you have the Chacham is clearly the oldest, and the other ones look more like children. So it's really 3 sons, but you have this really sense, of age here that's playing itself up, that's the image here. So there is that that age thing that certainly plays on. Now look, incidentally, what makes the Russia the Russia? What makes him the wicked son? He looks like a soldier, okay? Looks like a soldier for a good reason. He's portrayed as a soldier, right? And who are the wicked ones? The soldiers, okay? Now, in Israeli Haggadot, you have the image of the soldier, and that's the Chacham. If you look at Israeli Haggadot, on the Israeli Haggadot, you can see that, right? Because Israel, the soldier, is going to be the wise son, right? He's committed to the land, etc. So it's just interesting. That's an aside. It's just interesting how those definitions change. All right, that's just a side part. We wanted to show you the ages piece that's playing itself out. Okay, so what I want to do now is just look at a variety of sources related to the following question, and that is dealing with birth. We'll deal with sons at the moment. Okay. So what's the life cycle? What's the ritual for having a son? Bris is circumcision. Okay. Now, what's the definition of circumcision?
The covenant.
That's the pious definition of circumcision, which is a good one. And the question is, what does it mean there about covenant? We'll get to that. Okay, but the sense of sort of entry into the covenant. But what's the definition of circumcision? I mean, I won't draw diagrams.
Is it for health reasons?
That's a reason for circumcision. Think about what the definition of it is. The medical definition removes the foreskin. All right? So, that seems to be, perhaps, the definition of circumcision. Now, then you're answering another question is, why? All right? And that there's a whole series of suggestions. Okay, I don't want to get into that piece specifically now, but yeah, okay. However, if you look at, I want to look at some other sources now. That's what we normally expect, that's the definition of it. But let's look at and through that, entering into the covenant, absolutely. But let's look at a bunch of sources. All right, number 2. This is from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, which is an 8th century midrash. All right, this refers to this comment is on a verse from the book of Jonah. Remember from Jonah, Jonah's the reluctant prophet, right? He doesn't want to get into the business for whatever reason, and he tries to escape. And what happens is one of the first things he does is he goes on a boat, right? And then there's a terrible storm, and it looks like the boat is going to sink, right? And then Jonah eventually jumps into the water, has the story with the whale, and the ship, and the soldiers on the ship is fine. Okay? So someone read the text, just read it out loud while I get a drink of water.
The sailors, correctly reading, men, feared the Lord greatly. They offered a sacrifice to the Lord.
All right, that's the verse. Now it asks the question.
Did they offer a sacrifice? For a sacrifice from idolaters is not accepted.
All right,
Rather,
so what's the assumption there?
They were Jewish.
No, they weren't.
They were Jewish.
No. What's the text makes a certain assumption. First of all, it says they offered a sacrifice. Okay, now it asks the question, right? The question is, idolaters, well, they weren't Jews. The sailors weren't Jews. So and they're offering a sacrifice. It seems to be accepted. It's good. And say, how can they offer a sacrifice? They're not monotheists. Yeah, do you want to say?
Well, they saw the power of God, so maybe they converted.
All right, that's not the assumption. That's not the assumption of the text at the moment, but that's fine. But that's not the assumption of the text at the moment. Although in a process, though, it's going to be partially the assumption of the text. So you see how it plays out. Good, yeah.
Isn't the assumption sort of that they are idolaters?
Well, the assumption is they are idolaters, and it's not accepted, right? So that the idolaters can't offer sacrifices. Well, they can, but I mean, it's assuming, right? It's assuming that God's not going to listen to accept the sacrifices of idolaters. That's the underlying assumption. Whether you agree, disagree, I don't care. I just wanted to understand the text. Yeah.
Well, they're idolaters, but Jonah is not an idolater, so get rid of him, throw him over.
Well, that's what happens.
So he's the same.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. In this case, it isn't, but it almost takes that parallel function. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So look what the answer is. It relates a bit to what you said, but it's the answer to the question. Rather,
this refers to the blood of circumcision. That is like the blood of a sacrifice.
all right. So according to this, what did the sailors do? They circumcised themselves, which is not fully converting, but that's the answer to it. Okay, but rather, this refers to the blood of circumcision, which is like the blood of a sacrifice. I know, what's the implication of
The sacrifice is that, we know that circumcision usually is a breach, it's part of the covenant, and this is just like putting any lamb on any altar in any society.
this? Yeah, I think it's more than that here.
Okay.
It's a first step of becoming Jewish.
Yeah, and which is true, right? For men, it requires circumcision. But what does this really say about circumcision from that vantage point?
That it's as important as a sacrifice?
That it's viewed as a
It's
sacrifice.
important.
Okay, is important, but almost viewed as if a sacrifice. What else? What's really important is the blood. There's a circumcision. It's not about removing the foreskin. That may be the procedure. But what's really important here? The blood. Okay, it's the blood. And just as the blood of a sacrifice is important, the blood would be sprinkled from the animal on the corners of the altar, okay? So that what's important for circumcision, according to this, is that element of the blood, okay? Which is a different perspective. Yeah?
So that's why if some of a non-Jewish man converts to Judaism who's had a circumcision, he has to draw a drop of blood.
Exactly. Exactly. Right, exactly. There's that, it's not a tough numbers, but drawing a drop of blood. Exactly. The blood becomes a crucial element as well. Yeah.
So how do you explain the law of kashrut when you're supposed to get rid of the blood? If the blood is important.
Well, it's there's two elements here. One is you're not allowed in kashrut to eat the blood because of what? The importance of the blood. Because the blood is associated with the life force of the animal. So now that you're eating it, so we're kashrut, the tradition is to get rid of the blood, right? Because otherwise it's as if I say as if, and emphasize as if, but it's as if you're eating the blood, then you're eating the animal almost while it's alive, okay, the life force, right? So so there's that, and the blood of the sacrifice is sprinkled. It's not, the blood is never eaten. I mean, it's sprinkled on the altar, but as a sign of here, the life force as such is put on the altar as sort of the sacrificial element. But when it comes to actually eating it, and again, most sacrifices were eaten as well. They never ate the blood. They would eat the meat. Yeah. Okay. So, continue. Yeah.
When Isaac was born, when he was 8 days old, Abraham brought him for circumcision, as it is said, and when his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, and he brought him for an offering on the altar.
Okay. So what's the implication of this?
It's the blood of Isaac and the blood of the animal. It's,
Yeah, so according to this, what are you doing? What is a parent doing when circumcising a son, according to this?
you offer him up as a sacrifice.
It's as if you're offering them as a sacrifice. Okay? It takes, we want to talk about sort of lack of ownership of parent of child. Okay? Now, we don't kill the child. Right? So we certainly don't, God forbid, kill the child. But there is that sense of, with this newness of life, it's as if you are sacrificing the child on the altar. It's as if the child is being, now what does it mean to put an animal on the altar? It means to dedicate it to God, right? When in sacrifice, when you would take a sacrifice and designate an animal as a sacrifice, it then as such belongs to the sacred, and it's no longer yours. So if you say, as the farmer would say, or the herdsman would say, the shepherd would say, I'm going to give this sheep, okay, we'll call the sheep Schwartz. I am designating Schwartz, this particular sheep, as a sacrifice, and I'm going to bring Schwartz and offer Schwartz as a sacrifice. It's going to be a Thanksgiving offering. I had a good year. So Schwartz, the lamb, would be offered as a sacrifice. The shepherd would get part of it back to eat, okay, and part of the animal would be consumed on the altar, and part of the animal would be given to the priest to eat, because they have to make a living also. All right, so that's what would happen. But when the shepherd designated Schwartz to be as a sacrifice, and then the shepherd says, they're going along, and the shepherd says, you know what? He bumps into a bunch of friends, and he says, you know what? I haven't seen you guys in ages. Let's have a good festive meal together. And so if he takes Schwartz and then slaughters Schwartz and serves it to his friends, he's committed an act of stealing. It's called Me'ila, stealing from the sacred, because Schwartz has been designated as a sacrifice. And if Schwartz is designated as a sacrifice, the shepherd no longer owns Schwartz. The sanctum, the holiness, God, if you can use that term, owns Schwartz. And therefore, to use Schwartz for his own purposes is to violate the sacred. All right? Use another sheep, Cohen the sheep, but he can't use Schwartz. And so think of that, what that consciousness would be if circumcision has that also sacrifice. Then you're saying this, you're dedicating this child, right, to the sacred. which means that we line, just as you brought this child to covenant, Torah, chuppah, good deeds, so this child is no longer yours. Right? It doesn't mean you don't have obligation to look after the child, but this child is no longer yours in the sense the devotion is to the sacred. To the Brit Milah becomes a way of saying circumcision, hey, this child becomes like a sacrifice. You're not killing the kid, but you're saying you're dedicating the child to a certain life. Yeah?
Okay, so is that why we do the pit and the bed? Is we redeemed the child, we gave the child during circumcision, then we hand over a few shekels to the Kohen, and now the child, we can take the child home with us and take care of it?
It's actually a different case. It's related. In other words, you haven't, that only applies to the firstborn.
Right.
So the firstborn child for sure is God's, and belongs to the priest and not you. Okay? Belongs to the priest and not you, and then we do this pigeon a bed 30 days after the first month in which you redeem the child and such. I would argue it's a bit of a similar consciousness, but it's a different ritual. Okay? I think what's being created here in this, if viewing it as a sacrifice, is a certain consciousness of realizing the implications of what does it mean to have this child. All right? You have to dedicate this child's life to sacred. That's what it means to be a parent, to bring up a child. All right? You want to dedicate it to the sacred. Well, how do you dedicate the child to the sacred? Through a life of good deeds, through and those types of things. You can't bring him there. I want my child to be a god of thief. But I want my child to understand that what they're supposed to do in life is sacred things. Right? So it's that sort of. It's just here. It's a consciousness. I can't translate it in absolute legal terms, but it's a sense of consciousness of what it means to have that child, and that sense of wanting also to dedicate back to God. Yeah, there was in the back and then over here.
I was wondering is there any significance to the 8 days?
Yeah. What's special about 8 days? It's what?
It's supposed to be a period for the child to develop, for his system to develop.
Well, 8 days, it's health-wise.
Yes.
Right, it's one is health-wise, two, what are you saying again?
7 days is a 1 week cycle.
Right, it's 1 day more than 7. Right? 7 is sort of
So
the natural week. This is 1 day. 8 days are prominent days, biblically. So if you think about it, we're going to read, we read it a couple weeks ago in the Torah, the sanctuary, the Mishkan in the desert, the dedication is completed on the 8th day. Sukkot, all right? Sukkot has how many days for the holiday of Sukkot? Well, that's an interesting question. It's unclear. If you look at it biblically, it says it's a 7th-day holiday that has an 8th concluding day, which raises the question, what is the relationship of the 8th day to the other 7? I won't get into that now, but Sukkot has 7 days and an 8th concluding day, which we now do Shmini Atzeres and Torah and Reform congregations and stuff. Right, so there's the 8th, it's a biblical thing, it's an 8th concluding day to a 7-day holiday. So there is that element of 8, which is more, it's more than 7. It's beyond just the natural, word, it's that additional element. So it implies something special. Now it may also certainly have that natural sense, is that for the baby it's healthier to do it on the 8th day than earlier. And that doesn't surprise me that the Torah would be aware of that.
Yeah.
But it also carries something a little bit broader. Yeah.
So what is the consequence for a shepherd if he eats Schwartz?
Oh, he has to pay a fine. He has to give another animal.
He's hungry and instead of wasting the...
And pay a fine. Yeah, he has to pay a fine. But it's considered to be, there's a technical one to get out of it, you have to pay a fine, etc. But it's still considered to be something which is really wrong to do. Yeah. But you can't just offer an animal, you have to offer an animal and a fifth of the cost of the previous animal. Or a fifth of the cost, because that's sort of the fine that would be imposed if you did that. Okay. All right, let's look, we're going to see just some other sources related to this. let's look at source number 3. This is from Tanya Rabbi, it's a 5th century text. Whoever presents his son for circumcision is as the Kohen, the priest, who presents an offering on the altar. Okay? So this says that even more, right? So the consciousness of the father or the parents that have breathed is that as if they're the Kohanim, they're the priest, presenting the child as an offering to God. Again, that consciousness that there's something sacred here going on with the child. Again, nobody's suggesting to sacrifice the child, right? But it's just that consciousness that's associated with it. Okay, look at number 4, also from Pirkei Rebbe Eliezer. And on the day when Israel went forth from Egypt, all the people, which would be better all the men, were circumcised. Okay, there's a tradition that if you look at in the Torah, in chapter 12 of the book of Exodus, to offer the Paschal lamb as a sacrifice, men have to be circumcised. All right, so the assumption is, well, if the Israelites in Egypt offered the lamb, it must be what? That they circumcised, all right, before they did that. All right, so look what it says. They would take the blood of the circumcision and the blood of the Paschal lamb, and they would put it on the lintel of their houses. Right? Remember from this, the story of Passover. What did the people do? Took the lamb and put the blood on the lentils, the doorposts. This is saying, what else? What was the blood they put on the doorposts? And the blood of the lamb and the blood of circumcision. When the Holy One, blessed be He, passed over to smite the Egyptians, and he saw the blood of circumcision and the blood of the Paschal lamb, he was filled with compassion for Israel. It is said, when I passed by you and saw you wallowing in your blood, this is a verse from Ezekiel, I said to you, live in spite of your blood. Yes, I said to you, live in spite of your blood. Right, now you see it mentions blood here twice in the verse, right? So that's the implication that there were 2 bloods on the doorpost. Right? Now what's the implication of this for circumcision?
Well, first of all, they weren't Jews until they're circumcised. They were Israelites, but they didn't become.
There is certainly that suggestion that leaving from Passover till they got to Mount Sinai, they really essentially converted. Right. Okay, so that's one
They
thing.
converted, and then God had mercy on them. And
Okay. Take it a little further. What's circumcision then, according to this? Yeah.
Well, God instructed them, the Jews, so He made an identity, and then there's a definition back to the fathers that, this is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's a reminder that you're dedicating yourself again. You're sacrificing, you've given yourself up to God, and it's not just the blood offering of the lamb, it's myself, my soul, I'm going to what?
Yeah, good. What else?
I see where it says, live in spite of your blood.
Or live with your blood.
I see that as the opposite of live with your blood.
Yeah, okay. The context in Ezekiel is of a young baby sort of abandoned and still with sort of all the blood fluids on it from childbirth. So it transforms that into this. Granted, Ezekiel is just sort of a verse that's used with the emphasis on the mentions in your blood live. And so it's sort of the Mayachayi could be in spite of your blood or in your blood live. That even though you haven't been looked after, now you're going to be looked after. Yeah, but there's one other implication here. Yeah.
I have a different question. If blood is the essence of circumcision, why does it have to come from the foreskin?
So then it becomes a question. It's not exclusively the blood. The procedure is the foreskin. But what really seems to count here is the blood that results from it. Okay, so it's not just about the blood. That is a perfectly good question. All right, so there's a specific procedure to follow. All right, a particular place of the procedure to follow. But then what what these sources seem to be saying, what really is really important here is the blood of it. And the consciousness of the sacrifice, sacred element, and just of this consciousness, which, I'm trying to suggest goes back to that first line, about whose child is this. But I think there's another element here that this adds, and that is blood here saves. There's a saving element of the blood here, right? Because in Egypt, what happens in Egypt? You offer the Paschal lamb, you put the blood on the doorpost so God won't kill your firstborn. Right? So there's a little bit here of that saving element of the blood as well, and somehow there's a protective, saving element that's going to play itself out as well. Yeah?
Would there not have been that if it just had been the Paschal lamb?
Well, we know, good. Yeah. It seems to be, according to, if you read the Torah, what blood is it? It's just the lamb, okay? This is being read in addition to that. Doesn't seem to be the clear meaning of the Torah. This is being read in addition to that to suggest what's another element of understanding circumcision. That's what I was just trying to convey here, some additional elements that we might not normally think about that are in a certain way contributing to a certain consciousness.
I guess that this really bothers me,
Yeah,
because
good.
I think that this is where maybe when you bring in the idea of blood from a human, that the Christians took the idea of killing Christians to get blood to put on the doorpost.
Well, is that blood with the matzah or whatever? Yeah, I hear you. Blood is a powerful symbol. But that's why I'm emphasizing here. They're not killing the baby, right? I mean, there's no sources that suggest that. But yes, there were blood libels. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we're responsible for those, but yeah. Okay, let's just a couple of other examples of this in 5 and 6. In the same place where Abraham underwent circumcision and his blood remained, there the altar was built. Accordingly, it said, all the rest of its blood he shall pour out on the base of the altar. So this is suggesting as follows: where Abraham was circumcised was where the altar was in the temple in Jerusalem. Okay, so if there's blood, so it's saying, why is part of the issue for a sacrifice blood of the animal being poured out on the altar? Because that's the place that Abraham circumcised himself. Okay, just again, that sacrificial, sacred element that's associated with this. Okay, that there's something sacred, that the act of circumcision is almost a sacred act, making a baby sacred, almost creating a sacred space. Okay, just the final, the Targum Yonatan, one of the translations says, "For the blood of the Paschal lamb and the blood from the circumcision are mingled to make a sign on the houses which you inhabit, and I will see the merit of the blood and spare you." Right? That's talking about Passover, right? So again, the sense in which there's a salvic, there's something about the blood that's saving people, right? Something about it that it has a tremendous sense of power. Okay. Now, just a couple of other examples of this from medieval times that even extends it as well. Okay, the first text is from Rabbi Bachya, who's a medieval commentator. So he says as follows, based on these earlier sources: in homiletical fashion, the commandment of circumcision is as a sort of sacrifice. And just as the blood of the sacrifice, now notice what he adds here, just as the blood of the sacrifice is for atonement on the altar, okay? This we didn't see before. So just as the blood of sacrifice for atonement on the altar, so too the blood of circumcision atones. Okay, it's almost like a forgiving blood. It's a brit milah, a circumcision, is a time of almost atonement for the family. Okay, there's something, he's suggesting here, there's something almost metaphysical going on for the family. Accordingly, it is performed on the 8th day, for the sacrifice is not fit until the 8th day. It said, from the 8th day it shall be acceptable. Just quoting a verse about sacrifices. And just as it is written regarding a sacrifice, these things shall be eaten only by those for whom expiation was made for them, the eating of the sacrifice for those for whom it served that purpose, that the eating of the sacrifices for the purpose of atonement, so too Israel, the Jewish people, holds a banquet on the circumcision day. All right? Look, if you go to a bris for someone, unless it's Yom Kippur, what do you have after? Food. All right, because it's a joyous, right? Some with bagel and lox, right? Because it's a joyous meal, okay? Now you'll see what this is saying. This is taking that joyous meal is going even a little bit further here, okay? That because the circumcision in these sources is like a sacrifice, and the people offering would eat, or the priest would eat the animal, so too now we have to have a festive meal, because it's all part of that sacrificial. I know we're distant from sacrifice, but it's just these ideas of it's all part from the sacrificial sense, which again is relating to the sacredness of what's going on here. Right? The sacredness of what's going on here. And just one more example of it. This is from a book from, it's earlier, it was published in 1832, but it's earlier than that. Rabbi Chaim Palagi, who discusses the length prohibition, look, of engaging in labor by the child's father on the day of the circumcision, either before or after the circumcision. Since the day that a person offers a sacrifice is his holiday, if a person would offer a sacrifice in the temple, it becomes an individual holiday for the person. So if the parents are offering a circumcision of their son, it's a holiday. Shouldn't be going to work. And circumcision is like a sacrifice. The partners, however, the child's father may engage in their labor of the commonly owned shop. Let's say three guys own a store, okay? The other two guys can work the store, all right? But he doesn't work, but the store doesn't have to close. The moil and the sandik are simply permitted to engage in labor on the day of circumcision, the one who does the circumcision, the one who owns the baby. Since the moil is simply as a kohen of the priestly class who offers the sacrifice, and the kohen is not permitted to engage in labor when he offers the sacrifice. In other words, the priest, so you have the sacrificial, but the priest, the moil, can work that day. Right? He can go do one, go other, if he has another job, go to his other job, because he's offering the sacrifice. But the owner of the sacrifice has to take the day off. Right? Means for the parents, it's a holiday. Okay. And then there's another opinion, Rabbi Mordechai Karmi wrote that all three, the moil, the sandik, the one who holds the baby, and the father should, the parents should all take the day off. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But I just wanted to show you that theme again, how it plays itself out. Okay, so yeah.
This may be a little bit off track.
No.
Just something I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
How come there's not really any good instructions? First of all, if you believe in the Bible that God spoke to Abraham and told him what to do and told him to do the circumcision, and if you believe in the truisms that he kind of was thinking this or something, how would Abraham in that very ancient times know you're going to take a piece of the baby, but not to hurt the baby? Because how would they know surgically to remove just the foreskin? Because you can really hurt the male with that.
Yeah.
Why didn't they just do like a cut over here on the arm?
Well, it's not as dramatic. Yeah, I hear you, but I would work with an assumption of the following. The ancients were not as unsophisticated and as unknowledgeable as we sometimes think them to be. They knew stuff. Certain stuff they didn't know. Yeah, for sure. But they knew stuff also. People knew it said, take a sharp instrument, it says remove the foreskin, remove the foreskin. People knew stuff what they were doing. Otherwise, this never would have continued. Otherwise, it never would have continued. But think of the pyramids. Think of ancient buildings that were built. Right? It's pretty sophisticated.
And this is just something I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
There's such elaborate, detailed instruction about how to build, the altar, the tabernacle. Such
Yeah.
with the purple threads and the gold threads and things, but there's no instruction about how to do the circumcision.
All right, fair enough, and just remove the foreskin, I guess it's easy. Any doctors here?
I don't know.
Have done it, what? Yeah, he stormed out angrily. No, he just went out.
Yeah, you could stem.
Yeah. I think it's just relatively easy, that's my sense. It's relatively easy. And that's how Moyle learned, right? That's how ritual circumcisions learn. They watch. I mean, how do people really learn it? A friend of mine, who's my age now, shy 60, but when he was in his 20s, he was in Jerusalem, he was going to learn how to do this. So he went to the chief Moyle, the chief circumciser of Jerusalem. There was one guy decided did everybody. I mean, he couldn't walk down the street without people talking to him, because he either did them or their children or their grandchildren. So he got to spend time with him, and he followed him around and watched carefully. And then at a certain point, remember, he said, my friend Shaya said, the Moyle said, Shaya, I'm going to do this, right, under supervision with him. And you watched, and so it's something that could be learned. It's something that could be learned by mentoring someone and apprenticing to someone until you learn how to do it. So it's not really that difficult. And the med school, the rule was see one, do one, teach one. And there's an element of truth in that. I don't know if it's still true today, but years ago my wife was a resident. That was the motto. See one, do one, teach one. Well, here it's a little. It's just an apprentice thing to do. It's not that complicated. And apparently mistakes weren't generally made. Otherwise it would stop. Yeah.
Where does it state that the Moyle must be a male?
All right, good. So there's a whole debate. I won't go into that now. There's a whole debate about that. Does it have to be male or not? Traditionally, that's what happens. But we do have the case, even in the Torah, of Tzipporah, Moses' wife, right, circumcising Moses' son on the way to Egypt. And what happens if there's no male circumcised? The baby still has to be circumcised. So in traditional literature, that's discussed. The Reform movement, has men and women who do it. But there are sources about that. I mean, this is what has happened, but there certainly are sources about it that discuss that question. Okay. Yeah, I'll take two more, then I want to go on to one other area. Yeah.
So to me, like the idea of cutting the foreskin has so much, it's connected to men. So it's only the men's obligation.
Yeah.
If you cut an Arab, it could be anybody.
All right, that's the next thing we're going to do. All right? That's the next thing we're going to look at is what about women? All right, that's the question. So I just want to look at a couple of different sources of this. All right, so the question is as follows. The question is as follows. Look, there's obvious biology. But the question relates to this is what then is the significance of circumcision? And related to that is this, we saw one thing with this sacrifice. That's one motif that you see in the literature. But related to that is, if circumcision is entrance into the covenant, what is that saying about women? Right? What is that saying about women? There's a whole guy, Shia Cohen, wrote a whole book called Why Aren't Women Circumcised? So these are a couple of sources that I took from his book. But it also depends on what exactly is the covenant that's being talked about in terms of relationship with God with circumcision. All right? So if you look, I didn't bring it for you here. I'll just mention in passing. If you look at Maimonides in the Middle Ages and his discussion on circumcision, there, for him, the covenant which it seems to be described there, that's part of the element which we have in circumcision. For him, it seems to be much more of a social covenant of entering into the people than a covenant of entering into a specific relationship with God. All right? Now, if that's the case, if that's true for Maimonides, it's not true for everyone, but if that's true for Maimonides, then entry into the covenant then circumcision is not the only way to enter into a covenant with God. Right? And the Maimonides emphasizes more this social covenant to become part of Jewish men or with other Jewish men who recognize other Jewish men. And it's more of a social bond, which is important for the people in the community, but rather than this bond, this covenant between the people and God. All right? So that's just one approach. And it depends, again, on the importance of circumcision. Circumcision does not define one as a Jew. Right? It is necessary for conversion to Judaism. But a male who is not circumcised is still a Jew. Right? So it's not by any means absolutely necessary to be a Jew. It's a requirement to have this done or to do it, but one certainly still is a Jew if one is not circumcised. But the question then still is, well, what about for women? If you're doing something for men, all right, is there an equivalent for women as well? So one suggestion is, well, let's do the same thing for both, and it won't be related, it'll just be on the arm, okay? So then you have the question, well, is there something here about sexuality which is a determining factor, all right? And the answer is there's obviously something, right? So then the question is if that's the case, is there an equivalent for women? Or what do you do about the fact, again, that women aren't circumcised? You understand the question? So I think you probably have that question, I assume, right? All right, so let's look at a couple of sources. The first one, and again, this is based on Maimonides and some other people, is from one fellow, Yom Tov Lipman, who died in 1420. All right? So he says as follows. Now, part of what he's reacting to here is they were engaged in Jewish-Christian polemic, which was something which was pretty popular in medieval times. But it wasn't polite debates. I mean, these were really serious issues in which Jews in Europe were living close to each other, and there was a genre of literature in which there were real Jewish-Christian debates, proving which religion is superior, right? Because since Christianity is emerging out of Judaism, sharing the Hebrew Bible was taking a different direction, and the Jews didn't follow and become Christians. So what Christians are trying to do is prove to the Jews that if you knew how to read the Bible correctly, right, you'd be a Christian. Because you'd see that the Bible anticipated everything about Christianity. And then you have Jews responding to that in their own way, which says, you know, you guys don't know how to read. Right? And these polemics get very nasty, but they're also very dangerous. I mean, there's some famous public disputations that take place. This isn't polite conversation with friends. Right? These were very nasty. So you find these polemics written back and forth, and you find some published because Jews are getting asked these questions, and they have to be able to respond. Right? Now, Christianity at some point gets rid of circumcision. Right? Paul, and there was debate what exactly Paul felt, but Paul certainly does not require circumcision for the Gentiles. Whether he still requires it for the Jews or his attitudes towards Jews and Judaism is a matter of debate. But he certainly doesn't require it for the Gentiles. But if you're a Christian, right, and you're still affirming the Hebrew Bible, right, there was a whole debate, a whole heresy in Christianity which rejected the Hebrew Bible. But the majority position was you follow the Hebrew Bible as part of sacred canonized scripture for Christians. Well, then, what does it seem? If you read the Hebrew Bible, it seems like you should be circumcised, right? So Paul is substituting faith and for circumcision. You have other verses talking about circumcise your hearts. It doesn't literally mean cut open your heart and take out a slice, right? It becomes metaphorical of that. So then, which is the true way to behave? All right, that's one of the questions. So he's a little bit responding to that, but he's also responding to the issue of women here. Okay. So he says as follows: every male among you shall be circumcised. That we know from Genesis 17. So he says, Christians mock us, and he's speaking to a Jewish audience here. Christians mock us, saying women who have no circumcision do not have the status of Jews. Now you notice where he places this question, right? You understand where he's placing this question. In the mouth of Christians, right? If you're saying circumcision is so important, are you telling me Jewish women aren't Jews, only men? You understand the question, right? So he has to respond to that. But they do not, the Christians do not know that faith is dependent not on circumcision, but also on the heart. He who does not believe properly, his circumcision does not make him a Jew. Also, he who believes properly, behold, he is a Jew, even if he is not circumcised, but except he's committing a sin. Right, so what's he saying here? It's actually very interesting. What's he saying here? What does it mean for him? What does it mean for Yonatan Lippman to be a Jew? It means to have faith. He's actually sounding a little more Christian than Jewish here, which he's turning on its head against the Christians. But for him, it means what? To have faith. Right? Do women have faith? Sure. So of course they're Jews. All right? Of course they're Jews. And he makes then the radical statement that if he is circumcised, okay, but he who does not believe properly, you can be circumcised. A Jewish man can be circumcised, but if he doesn't have proper belief, then he's not a Jew. That's pretty extreme. All right? And the opposite is, you have proper belief, if you're a man, but you're not circumcised, then you're still a Jew. Except, you sin, you gotta be circumcised. All right, but it's not affecting the belief. In other words, what has he done for circumcision here? He's separated, right? He has separated circumcision from definition of being a Jew. Right? He's almost lowered it in importance. Right? Because again, he's responding to these Christians. This is his argument. The command now, so he asks a question. So the Christians have a legitimate question, right? Circumcision, what do women have? Right? So look what he says. The commandment of circumcision does not pertain to women. He acknowledges that. Likewise, women have the commandment of the sacrifice after childbirth that does not pertain to men. I remember your last week's Torah reading began a woman who gives birth, right? After however many number of days, she has to offer a sacrifice in the temple, right? That's not a command on the father, it's a command only on the mother. All right, so what's he saying here about circumcision? Well, he holds it. If you don't do it, it's a sin. Yeah. So when it's still mandatory, but to be a Jew, it's not as important as we normally ascribe it to be. And by the way, don't take this as a normative position. This is a particular text at a particular time. Yeah. Okay. What else? Yeah.
Okay, so he separated it to be a Jew is to be born of a Jewish woman. I mean, that's.
He acknowledges that.
Yes. So the circumcision doesn't, that act, all that is a commitment to give this child to God. So if you need to do that too, or else you haven't fulfilled your mitzvot. It's a sin, actually. Like he's committing a sin. He's not circumcised. He's still Jewish, but he's committing a sin.
Yeah. Now again, the sacrifice to God he's not talking about here. That's just another consciousness. Be careful about mixing them in. But yeah, but then what is he saying about women here? What's his response about women here?
That the women sacrifice.
Yeah, but it's more than that. I mean, it relates. We'll see how another source does with it. It's going to take it even more. But in this case, he's saying there are mitzvot that apply to men, and mitzvot which apply to women. Women who biologically have children have to offer a sacrifice in the temple, right? No one's complaining. What about the father? Why doesn't he have to offer a sacrifice? No, it only is for her. So circumcision is only for men. It's only for the guys. But in other words, it's not that significant. They have to be circumcised. They don't circumcise, all right, it's a sin. But it's not a defining characteristic here. In other words, if you were to ask him, why aren't women circumcised? He'd answer, because they're not men. Simple answer. It's not about worth. It's not about covenant. It's not about entry into the community. Circumcision is a mitzvah, right? Some mitzvot apply to men. In this case, it obviously can't apply to a woman, right? But she has some of her own mitzvot that don't apply to men, right? She's the mother who gave birth. That's not for sacrifice. That only applies to her, obviously. It doesn't. She's the only one who can give birth. It doesn't apply to men. You can extend this even more so. Priests, kohanim, have certain mitzvot of certain commandments that only apply to them. They're offering sacrifices in the temple. It doesn't apply to everyone. It only applies to them. No one's worth less as a Jew because not all the mitzvot, commandments, apply to them. Right? So he's sort of a little bit here downplaying the importance of circumcision. It's just interesting what he does. Yeah.
Well, I'm a Kohen, and I now
Congratulations.
understand.
Yeah.
Why can't I go to a cemetery?
Oh, good. So,
And how do I get buried?
no, because for $100,000 we'll put you in the sanctuary. No, one is, the tradition is, right, what you're left with is as follows. What Judaism has concluded over these past period of time is we don't want to lose the memory of the notion of a Kohen, of a priest, even though there's nothing you can do. And so priests traditionally, even though everyone is rendered impure because of contact with death, but traditionally priests who were still, Kohanim, traditionally try to stay away from death, as Kohanim in biblical times, when there was a temple, stayed away from death. Now, however, to keep in mind, once they're dead, they have to be buried, like anyone else, in the cemetery. And number two, when someone who is a Kohen passes away, their children, who are Kohanim, right, must occupy themselves with looking after the burial of their parent. All right? Even though it's rendering them impure, right? Because that's their obligation. So because the state of purity or impurity as defined ritually is not a value judgment of good or bad. It's not a moral statement. It's a statement related to what does it mean to enter into sacred space in the temple and standing before God who does not have a body as such and who is eternal, right? Who represents life. But that's not a moral judgment. That's a ritual definition judgment. So as a Kohen, God forbid you had someone who died and a parent passes away, then you look at, you ensure and you go to the funeral, you're absolutely part of it, even though it's rendering you impure. But if it's not an immediate relative, then the tradition is still to stay away. So that's a little bit how it plays out. Okay. All right, we're almost done. So I'll skip the next paragraph. You can read it on your own. But look at the Before Shore, who's from the 12th century commentary, and he says as follows. And this is referring to the verse in Genesis 17. And that shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you. Right? In Genesis, when you have the command of circumcision, God tells Abraham that this will be the sign of the covenant between me and you. All right, which there it seems to imply, what about women? Right? If it's the sign of the covenant between Abraham and God, well, what about covenanted women? All right, which is that question. Lippmann takes an interesting approach. He downplays the importance of circumcision. All right? It's still a mitzvah, it's absolutely supposed to do it, but it's not a defining mitzvah. All right? Here, Before Shore says as follows. He says it is a defining mitzvah. He says, a mark and a sign. What is circumcision? Covenantal. A mark and a sign that I, God, am the master, and you, the people, are my slaves. All right? You got to serve God. That's what it means. The seal of the sign of the covenant is in a hidden place, not seen. That is not seen. Why? So that the nations of the world should not say concerning Israel, they're maimed. Okay, you don't want them to mock Israel, criticize Israel, or think Israel is violating the law of the Torah about not making tattoos and naming herself. All right. Since God commanded the males, and not the females, we may deduce that God commanded to seal the covenant on the place of maleness. Right? So the sign of the covenant takes place in the sign of what defines maleness. And now we still that's as a point. But what about women? And so look what he answers. And the blood of menstruation that women observe by telling their husbands of the onset of their periods, this is for them covenantal blood. Right? Now, that's why we began with blood. Right? Is it just removal of the foreskin, or is it blood? Right? So those earlier sources talk about circumcision. It's blood. That becomes the sign. Like sacrifice, but that becomes the sign. So what is he saying here now? What's the covenantal blood of women? Right? That's where it becomes, just one sec, that where it becomes the sign of the covenant of women. It doesn't happen at birth, it happens later on. Now, he does add when they tell their husbands, which is related to separating traditionally during that time. So the question is, which is some debate, is it the act of acting on it and telling the husbands, meaning we have to separate, or is it just the blood itself? There are different opinions about that. But I think the emphasis on the blood here, which goes back to the blood of circumcision, that the covenantal blood of women is the blood of menstruation. And it's also just a form of blood. Man, you actively cause the blood to be shed. Here it's more of a natural process. But for the Bechor Shor, he said that becomes the sign of the covenant. And that notion of blood, again, is related to place, sexuality, equivalent, all right, on some level, and related also to progeny, children, etc. That comes with it. Yeah.
Okay, so I would like to dispute this because where men voluntarily change who they are with the circumcision, every woman will menstruate. So the Christian, the Muslim, the idolater will all be getting their periods. So.
Correct. There are other people. Well, I'd say a couple things. One, there's other people who circumcise, but that doesn't make it a mitzvah, a commandment. And that's why I think he also throws in addition to here that notion of telling their husbands, that they're sort of acting on that knowledge. It's not a absolutely. It's not a category that's part of it that's absolute, but it's that sense of they're acting on this blood, which is covenantal by following the tradition. So I think there is that a bit additional element as well. All I'm trying to point out here, whether you agree or disagree, it's fine with me. Not everyone says this, or sure says it. But what he's trying to do is to answer an issue, right? One approach to the issue was the previous. Don't make it an issue. There are men and there are women. Some men, nobody observes all the commandments. It's biologically impossible. So don't make such a big deal. That's a command for men, or a command for men. Women have other commandments, fine. But biological determinism is not determining covenantal relationship. Right? Because we recognize not everyone has the mitzvah. Here the Bechor Shor is saying, no, he's emphasizing the covenantal part. So he has to say, well, where is it for women? He says women, it's in menstrual blood, which again ties in, at least from a sexuality point of view, similar to Brit Milah. So he ties it in. Yeah.
So that would
we'll just take. Oh, we have 2 minutes. We'll take a couple more responses.
Okay, so that would mean that a woman is not in covenant with God until she's old enough to have a husband to tell him that she's menstruating.
Well, it's just emphasizing it in that sense. I wouldn't do the age thing. I wouldn't focus on the age thing here, except with the age of maturity is the beginning, right? The physical maturity, and that becomes for a child also. That becomes the age of responsibility, mitzvot, etc. So it's certainly it's certainly no, but a child. What I also take it one step further. So a 7-day-old Jewish baby is not in the covenant. Well, not really. I mean, it's still a Jewish baby. So there is an extension of it here, but what he's doing is emphasizing this notion of blood of the covenant. So there is that longer as such weight, but it's not excluding. certainly not excluding the girl before that as part of the Jewish people. It's just suggesting that if there's a sign of the covenant, there is a sign inherent to women as there is a sign inherent to men. That's what he's suggesting. Again, it's his opinion. I'm just trying to show that he's answering this question. Whether you like the answer or not, it's fine. But it just shows he's making. I'm not advocating for him. Just trying to show that there are two ways of answering this question. One is to downplay circumcision. The other way is to play up the importance of blood. All right, 2 more things. Yeah, and then we'll stop.
Menstrual blood is covenantal. Why is a woman considered impure and have to go to the
Because again, impurity is a ritual category. All right, keep that in mind. Impurity is a ritual, I said before. Impurity is a ritual category, not a moral category. There are places it's a moral category, but that's when you sin, really sin. I mean, do bad things. But in that context, if you look at the Torah, it's a ritual category, not a moral category. It's the same way that it may be covenantal, right? But it's still biological and relates to something which relates to both life and death. And just like the priest can't have any contact with death, menstrual blood is both life-giving and also sloughing off an egg. And it's also something that reminds us of our very real human physicality and frailty. So when standing before God in the temple, which is where or the Mishkan or the sanctuary, where you have these categories of impurity, where they apply, requires one to be in a state of not having had contact with death recently, a certain amount of time period, and also in terms of menstrual blood. There's another parallel to this, okay? Is it a mitzvah Jewish tradition to have children? Those who can. Okay, right. So a couple who engages in sex are ritually impure. Right? They have to wait a day before they could enter into the Mishkan, into the sanctuary. Now there's only one way, even with biology today, I know, but what they can do with doctors today, and implants and everything. But the way to have a child, the old-fashioned way to have a child is to have sex. Right? We're going to fulfill a mitzvah. Absolutely, absolutely. But you still have to wait a day because you're in a state of ritual impurity before you can enter the Mishkan, the sanctuary. Why is that? Because God doesn't have sex. So if you're going to the place which is sacred and has this sense of presence of God, so what you do is when standing in the presence of God, right, there's that absence of sexuality and physicality. So that's what they're related to. That's why I said it's not a moral category, it's a ritual category. Right? It's a ritual. There's a big difference between them. That's what they're saying. A Kohen, if a priest sees a dead body along the street, all right, and he's on the way to offer the sacrifice, and let's say it's Yom Kippur, and he's on the way to offer the Holy of Holies and sacrifice for Yom Kippur, what does he do? He becomes ritually impure and looks after that dead body, all right? Because his impurity in doing that is not a moral category. He would violate a moral category by not looking after that dead body. So it's a ritual category, not a moral category. That's just to keep that in mind. Just to keep that in mind. There was one more question there.
On the other side of the covenant was supposed to be the rainbow.
That's a separate issue with the time of Noah, that God says every time you see a rainbow, it's a sign of a covenant that God will no longer destroy the world. That's something separate. But that moves from a general, here we're talking about a more particular. Okay, we'll stop here. I know it's technical stuff, I just want to show you some other areas that people think about that we may not normally think about. Next week we'll do one thing on weddings, and we'll look at some interesting stuff associated with death. Okay.